Hello and welcome to the Show Up and Lead series. I'm very excited to have you share your insights on leadership today. And you are Emeritus Professor Gary Martin. Please share a bit about yourself to our guests.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm the CEO of the Australian Institute of Management here in Western Australia, and I have a background as an educator, having previously been a primary school teacher before I went into teacher education and then later into university administration. And I then found myself at the Australian Institute of Management in WA as the CEO. So it's a job I love.
So tell me, from educator to CEO, tell me about your experience of leadership in that space in terms of showing up and leading.
Yeah, it's kind of, for me, going back to primary school teaching, it actually was such a great background for leading. It made me organised, it made me thinking ahead, it made me looking out for problems, it made me start to look at opportunities. So when you think about what showing up, I almost view those terms as synonyms. So leadership and showing up, one of the same things. If you're a leader, you're there through thick and thin. You're there to empower people, not to so much direct people. And it's just being visible and presence. That's what showing up is really about when you're a leader.
I like the fact that you talked about empowerment. I recently wrote a chapter in my book, Enablement versus Empowerment. And empowerment is what we need more of in now what we call the 21st century and the ongoing challenges. Can I ask you to share a pivotal moment in your career where leadership actually made a significant difference?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll go back to my university days because I remember a period of time when the Vice-Chancellor of the university resigned, and after serving for 10 years and their gruelling jobs being in university admin, and then suddenly I found myself as interim Vice-Chancellor on my way to coming to be the CEO at Australian Institute of Management in WA. And so suddenly I found myself in this role where I was temporary type of leader, if you like. I was interim. I was going to be doing that job for 6 months before moving to the Australian Institute of Management in WA. And as soon as a Vice-Chancellor who's been there for a period of time, like in any organisation, leaves, there's this funny feeling that pervades an organisation. There's a feeling of not sure what's next, who's going to be the person that takes on the role. People fear. There's some fear there. They don't know what's coming up when they're used to having, a regular job with the regular things. Everything is sort of thrown up in the air. So I think during that period of time, I could have just chosen to hold the fort. But I think what I did do when I was there as an interim CEO of the university is talk to people, communicate what was happening, let people know how the Vice-Chancellor recruitment process was. Didn't tuck myself away in the office. I was showing up all around the university, talking to people at meetings, talking to individuals, just to make sure that people knew that there was a plan and we were working our way through that plan. And I think when I left at the end of 6 months, I think people really appreciated that I brought some stability to an interim role, which is quite rare in some situations. But it was all about just talking to people, letting them get on, reassuring them, trying to address concerns and fears.
I agree with you, and the underlying element there is communication. So tell me more about how you use communication now in the CEO role to continue to bring people on the journey.
Yeah, well, I think I'm lucky in my organisation because I can work with people every day and probably see them every day as well, because it's that sort of organisation. We have around 60-odd staff and a community of 200 independent consultants, cleaners, caterers, the works. And most of those people I'll bump into at some point in time. One of the things I first did when I went to the Institute was made sure that I wasn't tucked away in an office where nobody could find me. I was actually positioned myself in the middle of a building where everyone can see me all day, every day, and I've made an effort to actually go out of that office and talk to people. Now, I have to say, I'm very conscious of that too, because sometimes when I walk around and talk to people when they're at the desks, people might also think, well, why is he here checking up on us? So I find kind of find the right balance between getting out and about and letting people get on with what they're doing without interrupting them. But I think, again, you talk about showing up. I am showing up every day in the office. People can see my every move. I'm not a mystery person tucked away, which is sometimes what leaders tend to do. They tend to hide, or not deliberately hide, but move away from where people are working. And I don't do that.
I like it. And, having been to AIMWA, you have massive glass window. That's your office. Glass windows on either side. But what I love about that is that notion of the underpinning evidence of I trust you, I see you, I trust you, collaboration, and that notion of connection. Tell me more about how you grow the leaders that you work alongside in terms of growing that trust and that notion of collaboration and, more importantly, connection.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I do, if I say I'm going to do something, I tend to do it. Whereas often we hear complaints about leaders saying they're going to do something, then they don't follow up or they don't do anything like that. What I do know about trust is, if you've gained it, it can take a long time. So it probably took me 2 or 3 years to gain trust in an organisation. That's a long time, but that's how long it actually takes. You don't get it just by arriving on the scene and saying nice things. It's a long process, and people watch you all the time, and you tend not to think that people pick up on what you do and how you act, but they do. So you're pretty much on display, and so you've got to make sure you're modelling the things that you want others to do as well. And I find that that actually helps to build trust, is if you're showing up, you're talking to people, they've had some experiences of you, and if you promise something, you deliver on it. You go off and do it. You don't leave people hanging. But I think the other side of it is you've got to trust people. You don't get people's trust unless you trust them in the first place, and that's part of that process.
That's true. That's aligned with Kouzes and Posner's work of modelling the way.
Yeah.
So, again, we both know that leadership is not easy, and people have this perception that they'll get to a leadership position and it'll be fine.
Yep.
But it's plagued with lots of daily challenges and an assortment of challenges. Could you give us an example of a really difficult situation that you really had to mitigate in your leadership role?
Yeah, I think probably like the pandemic experience is rich. Is absolutely rich in difficult situations. So if you want to say one situation, it is the pandemic, and how to navigate through something like that is challenging. But I think one of the things during the pandemic, where there were job losses, there was no business, there were people upset. We said goodbye to people that had worked for years and had decided that that was the time to leave. I think that during that time it was all about not just being an empathetic leader, but also it's no good just having empathy if you don't actually match it or follow it up. So I think during that period of change where everything was, again, thrown up in the air, I think the way that I was able to do that was to try and understand people's position and talk to them about how they were feeling, and then trying to provide whatever guidance and advice that I could to allow them to move on to another life, or to survive in an organisation in employment during very, very tough times. But I think all of it came down to empathy, but not just empathy alone. You can step into people's shoes, but then how do you read it? What actions do you take as a follow-up?
Tell me about your perspective in terms of resilience and what leadership or what leaders need to have in that space, or maybe need to grow in if they haven't got it.
I think there's a fundamental flaw that a lot of people have when it comes to their own resilience, and that is, I hear time and time again, people, a leader has to actually put their team before themselves. And, that makes a lot of sense. But the reality is, if you don't put yourself before everybody else, then you're not going to be good enough to lead anyone, because you'll get battered around as a leader. If you don't take time and take stock to look after yourself, you're not going to be looking after anyone else. And it's just like on an aeroplane when they say in an emergency, when the oxygen masks drop, look after yourself first so that you can look after the others. And that must be applied to leaders. And many leaders just let that go. They think that they're doing the right thing by, doing jobs for other people, doing far more than they should. And then the consequences are that they burn out and they're no good for anyone. So it's all about your self-care, and that makes you a more resilient person. So if you've had a knock, then you need to take a step back, rest, recover, and move forward. You don't just keep moving on.
That's a great reflection piece. And that leads me into a pathway question, I like to call them. Leaders often have to have courageous conversations with people. Mm-hmm. What's one, without giving all the specifics, but what's one that's really stayed with you, one that it was hard to have, but given your skill set, your resilience capacity, you were able to mitigate it, not just for yourself, but for the other person?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges sometimes is we're thrown into leadership roles, we provide support, and people still don't make it. So those sorts of discussions with someone on your team who hasn't made it and who has probably been bitten off more than they can chew in the first instance, that kind of discussion I've had before with people about their leadership. There's a number of options. You can move into different roles where you use the skills that you have. But of course, the difficulty is actually having the discussion in the first place. It's not actually the discussion itself. It's making the decision that you need to have a discussion with another person, another leader in particular, to really say you're not really making it in this role. And again, we tend to avoid those things. And you know what? It makes that person's job 10 times harder, and my job, if I'm having that discussion, 10 times harder. So you're not doing anybody any favours when you avoid those sorts of discussions.
So there's a lot of planning. So I say to people often, you really need to think about the why of the conversation.
Exactly.
And so where do you fit in? What's a trigger that comes for you out of that? Is it that, I'm a leader who likes to be liked, or a leader who likes to be respected? But I often speak about honouring the dignity of the human person.
Yes.
And I say, as a leader, you have a responsibility to honour the dignity of that person.
That's right, yeah.
If the job's not working for them,
you're doing them a disservice by just pushing on day in, day out. It damages them. People around them can see that it's damaging them. Whereas a bit of reorientation, perhaps a different context, a fresh start, can change things entirely.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is, AIMWA looks at training and facilitation, and it's about growing people. So what are your thoughts about growing, in the first part, emerging leaders, and then how to sustain the growth of established leaders?
Cool. Well, we're very lucky for emerging leaders, because we have so many different tools and courses and so on that we can offer to our own emerging leaders. And so I think, one of the things we do is emerging leaders get offered those sorts of courses, particularly if they want to pursue a leadership type of role. But it's not just that. We have internal coaching opportunities as well. We can also give people a leadership role for a project. So it's not a leadership role with a title, but it's leading a project that helps to build and develop leadership skills. So we can do that. And then as people grow and develop into experienced leaders, it's certainly people might come to you and say, what do I need to do and improve? But it's actually not about that then. When you become an experienced leader, it's actually about if you're at this level, how can you rise to the next level? And if you're at that level, how do you step up? It's actually about having the tools, the strategies, the reflective capacity to actually improve and develop. I'd say enhance rather than improve, because sometimes when we use the improve or repair, it's kind of like a pit stop model where you put a car over the pits to get repaired. It's not like that with experienced leaders. It's actually taking them to the next level and the next level after that. And I think coaching type initiatives really do help to develop experienced leaders to the next step.
That's really interesting. So when we think about where we are geopolitically, and, I read an article from Harvard, I think it was from Bayer and Holy, and it was produced in March, and it talked about the challenge to the agency of leaders today. What are your thoughts about the paradigms and paradoxes that we're experiencing now, and how are leaders better able to step up and in, given the lack of uncertainty in anything at the moment?
Yeah, I think if I was a leader in a challenging situation these days, I would have a brains trust around me. So I'd have 4 or 5 people around me that I could actually have a chat with and really put me in a position where I have to reflect. Having one person's great, but having 4 or 5 different people that you trust, is probably the best thing that you can actually do. You form your own little network of support, and you can support them and they can support you, but it's then about being able to throw ideas about and test out solutions and think through challenges. I think that's the kind of thing that we need to do more of with experienced leaders, because it also guards against hubris, which obviously is the intoxication of power or intoxication as a result of too much power. And we see this in a lot of leaders in the community, in politics, in all sorts of organisations where they've been in a role for a while and they suddenly think that they know everything, and once you get into that cycle, it's a downward cycle from there on. They become arrogant, they don't listen to others, they make mistakes, they blame others, they cease to empower people, they direct people. So you want to guard against hubris right from the beginning in a career as a leader. And one way is to have a group of people around you that can give you feedback in such a way that you trust it, you feel comfortable with it, you feel safe about it. And that's what some world leaders need to do. They probably do that anyway. They've probably got a whole range of people to advise. But the everyday leader in this sort of context needs, it's almost like your reflection panel, people to run an idea over or to act as your sounding board. Because I think they always say, one mind, well, 5 minds are better than one in solving problems and responding to challenges.
I think that's fantastic, and that's really, really well said. So in that space, let's talk about misconceptions of leadership. What do you think are some of the misconceptions of leadership? It's not all celebration and events, is it?
No, it's not. It's hard work, and you have to show up. As we started off this discussion, you have to show up. You have to show up all the time. There are times, obviously, where you take time out, but generally speaking, you show up all the times. And I think the misconception is that if you're a leader, you will never have anything but I don't want to use the work-life balance because I kind of don't think that's the right word to use, but you won't get to enjoy some of the things outside of work as much, because people think that leaders be totally committed. 90% of their time has to be about their job and leading others. And I think the important thing to say here is that anyone who is on their deathbed, they never say, I wanted to spend more time at work. I mean, people have heard that before. They'll say they wanted to spend more time on family and friends. So if you take the attitude up front that, you're going to make all these sacrifices for the things outside of your leadership role, then I think you've got leadership all wrong, because I think a great leader will have a very balanced life and will experience other things outside their direct leadership roles. And those things outside work will help to shape their leadership role. And I think that's a really important thing. And it's a misconception that you have to give your all to a leadership role, which sometimes, people demand. They say, this leadership role demands all of your time. That's not effective. You won't be an effective leader.
Yeah, very well said again. So I'm going to ask you, what are 2 non-negotiables for you that you live and breathe in your experience and that have followed you in your experience as a leader?
I think in terms of leadership attributes, I would say your ability to adapt, non-negotiable. If you don't adapt, you'll be an architect of your organisation's decay. It's as simple as that. You want to be an innovator, change maker for all the right reasons. And so if you are a person that can't adapt to situations and new contexts, then you don't belong in a leadership role. That's one of them. The second one I think is really important is a non-negotiable leadership trait is a lack of emotional intelligence. We hear so much about people who have leaders who lack emotional intelligence. It's easy. If you ask someone in a room, have you ever had a leader who's you felt lacked emotional intelligence, the hands will fly up. People will be dying to tell you what it was about that leader that made them emotionally unintelligent, if you like. And so I think wherever I've been, I've really tried. I don't say I'm perfect, and I'm sure there's people who can tell me otherwise, but I've really tried to be an emotionally intelligent leader, someone who knows what will bring out the worst in me. So it's about knowing yourself and knowing others. And I know the things that people might say that will bring out the worst in me, and I monitor that, and I'm self-aware of that, and I manage it, basically. So there's that bit to it. But also people that have a complete disregard for others' feelings is not acceptable.
Agreed with you. So tell me, I heard you say you monitor how, things that people might think or perceive of you. So tell me about self-reflection, because we know the Human Rights Commission talks a lot about the importance for leaders to engage in self-reflection. What does self-reflection look like for you?
I like the question, because I think that is probably one of the things that leaders don't do enough of, and that is the self-reflection, partly because of time, but partly because people don't even think about reflection. Now, I'm from a background, I said before, in education, where part of being a teacher was all about being a reflective practitioner, and that means having experience or planning an experience, having that experience, thinking about what happened and how it might be enhanced the next time you find yourself in a similar situation. And that's what reflection's all about. But I tell you what, it is a hard concept to get across to people. And only because I had years of it drummed into me do I know what reflection is like. And I reflect when I'm driving home in the afternoon. I don't put on a podcast. I don't listen to anything. I have time just in the car where it's dead silence, no radio, to think about the day. What did I do well? What didn't I do well? What should I be doing tomorrow as a follow-up? So it's a cycle. It is looking in the mirror. I mean, we've all heard that before, but it is reflective practices, turning things over in your mind in a consecutive way, one experience or multiple experiences, and taking what you can from those to make you a better leader the next day.
I'm so glad you said that. Someone asked me, I think it was Ben on the last recording of the series, and I said I actually get into the car when I go home. There is no music on, and I ask myself, what worked well today, what did not work well, but what could also be improved. So there's some hope of something getting better, the next time. But I think we need to do that more and more.
Yeah.
Our way is not necessarily the right way. It is a way. And I love your suggestion of having a trusted circle.
Yeah.
That's really
works,
important. So if you have any advice to give, and then we're going to get into the 10-question round. If you have any advice to give to anyone who is aspirant in leadership and wanting to be genuine in their approach, not being guided by ego, but really genuinely wanting to make a difference, what would you say to them?
Be prepared to be a change agent and to support change and to be adaptable yourself. Work on your emotional intelligence to make sure that you can work well with people. Spend time building trust and recognise that it just doesn't happen overnight. It can take months and years, but also know that you can lose it pretty quickly. And I think the other one is take advice from people you trust. And when I say take advice, it's not if someone says you need to do more of this, it's a decision that you have to think, it's something you have to think about. But just because someone tells you something doesn't mean you do it. You have to reflect on what happened. So to go back to that reflection, don't just engage in superficial reflection. You need to trawl right through your experiences and go deep before you then come up with something that you're going to do to become a better leader. But if you don't reflect, and this is the main advice as a leader, if you don't reflect on your experience, then you're not going to progress. 1 year's experience as a leader is the same as 20 years experience, of course, if you don't reflect on a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year basis.
And that's fantastic. And that aligns with the 2 questions I'm always asking people to consider. How do you turn up? And it's not just what you're wearing, but how do you turn up? Awareness of your triggers and the like. And then how do other people see you turn up?
Sure.
I love your reflection. So we're ready for our round, our 10-question round. All right. Are we ready? Beverage order.
Long black, topped up with skim milk.
Okay. Early start or slow morning?
Very early start, always.
One thing you do before a big gig?
Probably pause and think.
Okay. Favourite way? Did I interrupt you there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to sit still. Yeah, sit still.
Okay, sit still. Favourite way to reset after a big day?
Sit back in an armchair, turn TV on and watch something that I don't really have to concentrate on.
Great.
Let my mind wander.
Biggest strength as a leader?
I think I'm good with people, but of course it's easy for me to say. The proof is speaking to people that work with me.
Something you're still working on as a leader?
I'm always working on every single skill, including emotional intelligence, being more reflective. It's kind of that never-ending cycle. You will never reach perfection, but you want to work and get as close to perfection as possible.
Okay. Window seat or aisle?
Definitely aisle.
Okay. Leadership in one word?
Dynamic.
Best advice you've ever received?
I think that best advice was all about what I've already shared, and that is have a life and be a leader as well.
One thing every team needs?
Well, I'd say it's a great leader, but one thing every team needs is trust within a team.
Oh, that's so great because that leads into my last one. Trust is built by?
Showing up and being consistent.
Emeritus Professor Gary Martin, thank you so much for joining us on Show Up and Lead.
Thank you, Nancy.